Hi, I'm Jess.
Hi, I'm Kristen.
And this is ReDIScover, a conversation where we travel through everything that makes up the essence of who we are and how to live authentically and imaginatively.
Here, we invite you to join us as we explore and discuss a little bit of, well, everything.
From Disney to cultivating your most authentic life to deepening your relationships and talking about the real stuff.
We hope you'll find this a space that speaks to you, encourages you, and brings a little bit of magic into your day.
Hi guys, I'm Jess.
Hi everyone, I'm Kristen.
And welcome back to this week's episode of ReDIScover.
Today is a very exciting episode that has been highly anticipated by both of us, but that we've kind of kept a little under wraps. If you were around back in March, you probably heard our episode at the end of March where we introduced all of you to the Enneagram. I know we kind of talk about it here and there, and we thought it was high time that we gave some context for this thing that we talk about all the time. So we gave a brief overview. Well, it wasn't very brief. We gave an overview, though,
extensive overview
of all 9 types and kind of some core motivations and fears and everything surrounding this wonderful tool that we've both found super useful in our lives. But we enjoyed it so much that we wanted to kind of create a series surrounding the Enneagram. And we thought if we were going to do that, we should definitely call in some professionals. So we're very excited today to introduce to you Steph Barron Hall. She is a certified Enneagram professional. She is author of the book that I love and I hope that you will all go look for. It's called The Enneagram in Love. And she's also the founder of 9 Types Co. And if you don't follow 9 Types Co. on Instagram and you are excited about the Enneagram or learning about the Enneagram, this is your number one most accessible available tool for sure. She also has a master's degree in organizational communication and leadership, and all of that culminates in her knowing a heck of a lot more about the Enneagram than we do. So, Steph, thank you so much for being here. We're so excited to have you.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
All right. Steph, can you give us a little insight into your background and kind of your first encounter with the Enneagram, which obviously ultimately led to you pursuing it as a focal point of your career?
Sure. I mean, when I answer this question, I kind of like to go all the way back in time.
Okay.
And in the sense of, I've always loved personality assessments, personality tools, etc. I remember even when I was a kid, I had a book that was like, if your favorite color is orange, then this is your personality. If you write your A's this way, this is your personality. So even when I was a kid, I was fascinated by just like the differences between humans. And so when I went to college, I studied psychology because I was really interested in the way that worked. And I was able to use Myers-Briggs on one of the teams I was on in college. So that was like my very first introduction to using a personality tool at work. And I started having this thought of like, okay, I would actually love to be able to use some sort of tool like this. At the time, it was Myers-Briggs, but for team building, I think that is just so fascinating. So post-college, I was working at an organization and I was a member of the management team, and we used a tool called Total SDI. I think the name has actually changed since then, but and this was a motivation-based tool. So again, dove headlong into it, was really obsessed. My husband was like, hey, you like that? You might want to check out the Enneagram. And I was like, nah, I'm good. Right? And then a few months later, my sister, and this is, an older sister thing, I'm sure, was like, hey, you should check out the Enneagram. And I was like, okay. So she sent me a quick online test. And when I got the results, I was like, yes, I'm the achiever, and then I started reading a little bit more about what that actually meant. And I was like, ooh, I really hate this, which was actually so fascinating too, because when my husband had, taken a quick test online, he actually printed out the results and gave them to me and I was like, okay, this is actually really enlightening. But yeah, that was kind of my first foray into it. And I just started getting really interested, reading a bunch of books. And now is the next part of the story, which is my tendency to turn everything into a business. So at the time I had, like I said, a full-time job. And I also was working, I had an event florals job. So, I did weddings and events, or an event florals business, I should say. So I did that on the weekends in addition to my full-time job. And once that kind of calmed down and I was like, okay, I'm ready to move on from this, I was looking for another side hustle. And I thought of, through like listening to a bunch of podcasts and stuff, making coffee mugs for each Enneagram type.
I would buy that.
Yeah. So I hired a designer. I actually worked in merchandising at the time, and my husband was in product development for like physical products. So we both had that background. And so that's kind of actually how 9 Types Co. got started in 2017. We created these mugs. We started selling them. That's where it all started. And then soon after, people started asking me to like teach their groups or their small groups or their workplace or whatever. And so then I was like, okay, well, maybe I should get some sort of certification, make this official. Mm-hmm. So I did that in 2018, and it's just really grown from there. And now I don't sell the coffee mugs anymore, but I still do educate people on Instagram.
I like that it did stem from coffee mugs, though.
Yes.
That is a cool,
yes.
cool story.
As a resident coffee addict of our podcast.
Yes.
I love that.
So what did you like hate about the 3 part when you first got the results in? This isn't on the
yeah.
But
Yeah. No, I think it was really, I had recently become aware of my tendency to shapeshift.
Mm-hmm.
I like noticing, okay, I'm not as actually like authentic as I thought I was.
Yeah.
I think I wanted to be somebody who like doesn't care what other people think about me, and it's just kind of like who she is. But I was noticing like, oh, I actually do really have this strong tendency to like shift what I think, what I talk about, not necessarily what I actually believe, like my values, but like how I convey them and the strength with which I convey them. I started noticing that tendency between like my different communities that I was a part of.
Yeah.
And so reading about that, I was like, oh, other people can see this. Like, I'm not fooling anyone. I thought I was fooling everyone. And like, so that was really, I think, kind of exposing for me.
Yeah.
It
really
brings
tough.
a lot of awareness
Yeah.
when you find out your Enneagram type. Like, whoa, I feel very vulnerable.
I always say it makes it feel like your insides are now on the outside.
What sets the Enneagram apart as a tool for self-knowledge and relationship growth from your perspective?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the big thing is that it is naturally growth oriented. Like that's kind of where it came from. And so that is the perspective that is interwoven in most like quality Enneagram teaching. Mm-hmm. And so rather than being a tool where you can just describe yourself, it's really inviting you to do some of that deeper work, look at the awareness part, to illuminate the blind spots and the shadows that either you are choosing to ignore, or literally sometimes our psyches are like, or, our egos are like, okay, I don't want to look at that. That is too painful. That's too hard. And like, we're blind to it. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's why it's so powerful, especially because a lot of the time when we're living from that space of protecting ourselves and protecting our ego and living from that perspective, mm-hmm. You can't really be very self-aware. Right. So that's a challenge, but also like, it can be really hurtful to other people when you're not aware of yourself and you're not aware of how you're impacting others.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. It is really growth oriented. I love that so much.
Yeah. And it's nice because it doesn't keep you in a box of where you are in this moment. You're like, okay, now I'm aware of this and I can find tools to move forward because I'm tuned in now.
Yeah.
So, I love that. There's a lot of expansiveness in there.
Mm-hmm. Well, we know that your passion and focus surrounds the Enneagram as it relates to professional contexts, as well as all of the other facets of the Enneagram. But for those who haven't kind of considered it as an organizational tool, why do you believe it should be part of professional culture?
Yeah. I think, we've all heard of this concept of emotional intelligence and how great leaders have a lot of emotional intelligence and stuff. And I think this is something that has been changing a lot in the past 20 to 30 years. The research has really grown. But but there just aren't a lot of tools that help you. Like, it's like, here's emotional intelligence. You should have this thing. But there aren't a lot of tools saying like, this is how you build it. This is how you grow in self-awareness, et cetera. So I think that's probably one of the most important aspects of it. I actually, because we already mentioned, I finished grad school recently. And that is a big part of my story as well. Once I realized, okay, I actually want to use the Enneagram with teams, I went back and got my master's degree to specifically work in organizational communication, meaning helping teams work together better.
Yeah.
And so my capstone project was creating a new suite of training materials focused on the connection between self-knowledge and interpersonal communication. So there is this concept of like, anytime we're talking with somebody else interpersonally, there's also intrapersonal communication happening. So that's continuously going on. And if you're not aware of how you talk with yourself, or maybe it's not very kind, that can really impact the way that you are communicating with others. So that's a huge part of it. Also, in every organization development class that I've taken, it's really more about personal development. And so that self-leadership aspect, and I think, again, this is like going to a leadership grad program. That leadership aspect has to start with self-leadership. And so that has to start with like self-awareness, self-observation, self-knowledge, all these different things. And so the Enneagram is just a fantastic tool to build those things and be more impactful in like a whole person approach instead of like you're just like one little, spoke in the wheel. It's right. The whole person. And it can be hard too, because it can be very vulnerable. And sometimes people aren't really ready to go there at work.
Yeah.
So that's a big challenge as well.
Yeah. Like you were saying about the emotional intelligence thing, like some people are like, oh yeah, I have it, or I should have it. But there's a difference between like claiming that and actually living it and diving in, like being brave and courageous enough to like face those parts of yourself. So the Enneagram is a great way to do that, I think, as well.
Absolutely.
On that note, what are some practical, actionable ways the Enneagram can be integrated into the workplace?
Yeah. The way I do it is I offer to start 1 and 2 hour sessions, basically going through just an overview. I want people to really feel curious about it and get interested, but I don't want them to be overwhelmed, obviously. So, that's a really great way. I think it is really important to have a professional come in if you want to use it with your whole organization, because there are so many intricacies of it. And a big thing that I do is I lay out the ethics, basically like ground rules at the start of it, because it can be something that people are like weaponizing. And people who are really interested in the Enneagram at first, like a lot of the time we're like, oh, you're such a 1. And it like becomes like this joke, right? Yeah. But that can make people feel really alienated, and it can actually have really damaging consequences for their career. So I think it's really important to start with those ground rules and the ethics. And then also I think finding somebody who's able to give you some things to leave behind. So for example, communication cards that say, this is how to communicate with this type. That's something that I offer to my clients. And there are other like great tools that are similar to that, which I can mention later when we talk about resources. But I think just making it not only like the theory, but also making it really practical is really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And having some like tangible takeaways and references is huge to have something to come back to. How would you advise someone to utilize the Enneagram as kind of an interpersonal means to cultivate understanding rather than, as we said, weaponize it and use it against a colleague? For example, like, you're such an A, you would say that, or whatever.
Yeah. I think the most important thing is to start with yourself. I think that there's a lot of enthusiasm around the Enneagram, and like, I totally did that. I mean, I'm not saying that I like did it the right way when I was first into the Enneagram. But I think now I have such a different perspective. I think I just have a lot more reverence for it as a tool, and for like really holding it really gently, because people can have some really big awakening moments with it, and they can really shut down if that happens in the wrong way or too quickly. So start with yourself. So start internally and dial into the humility needed to make the biggest changes in yourself personally. And then also use it for self-observation. So use it to really observe yourself. And like, if you have an interaction that didn't go well, observe like what triggered me in that, environment, or what was it about that made me feel this way? And not to say that you have to like suddenly be able to shapeshift and be able to communicate with everyone in a specific way, but tailoring communication style in a sense can be helpful. Yeah. So an example of this would be that I use often is something that happens a lot in the workplace is specifically with type 3s and then like maybe 5s and 6s. So 5s and 6s ask a lot of questions. They want all the information up front so that they can make the right choice, right? They want to be able to make a well thought out, well-informed choice. 3s are like bottom line communicators. So let me just give you the very basics. You can let me know if you have questions and ask them, and then we'll move forward as fast as possible. Right. Yeah. So that can be a challenge because the 5 or the 6 ends up feeling like they're not being given all the information. They're not being supported. They're not, a part of the team. They're not being listened to. And the 3 can feel like, well, why are they always slowing us down? Right. So being able to use the Enneagram in that context is like, oh, I see John as a 5. He's not just trying to slow us down. He's not doubting my leadership. He's actually asking questions to make this process better. And then John can say, oh, Susie's a 3. She's not trying to just steamroll me. She's, thinking that I'm going to be able to gain enough knowledge from just the bottom line communication.
Right.
So creating more understanding around that is probably the most helpful way.
I love that. That just makes sense to hear it in the context. And I think if we all had tools like that were implemented, it would make communication in the professional space so much clearer.
Yeah. It cultivates empathy, right? We're just kind of understanding the why a little bit more. That's great.
Yeah. And in all workplaces, we have words that mean something to us that don't mean anything to outsiders. For example, you'll hear somebody say, oh yeah, just ping me when you get that result, or just ping me when you're, like the word ping, or like saying ping me. We know, right? Like if you worked in an office setting, you know what that means. Yeah. You know exactly what that person's saying. Yeah. But if you haven't worked in that office, then you're like, what? Like if you Google what does ping mean, then it's like, that doesn't mean anything in this context. Right. Yeah. And so it's all about building common language, which we naturally do as humans, and we naturally do in groups and societies, like in office settings. And so introducing the Enneagram as another way to have some common language to communicate about ourselves kind of offers a little bit of shorthand to say, okay, like I'm understanding a lot about this person and how I need to relate with them that I didn't realize before. And that can be really helpful.
Especially now that so many people are working remotely and you don't get as much context insofar as like haptics and nonverbal language and seeing a whole person in an actual conference room. You're getting this much of a person in a Zoom block or nothing at all. I think with that piece taken away, this becomes even more elemental, really.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So do you have a story that comes to mind of a time when you witnessed an organization transform because of implementing the Enneagram?
Yeah, I actually had a client last year that the leader was a 3, and there are a bunch of different types on the team, but none of them were 3s. And so just learning the Enneagram. So I basically did a 2-part session with them. The first one was pre-recorded and they watched that. Mm-hmm. And then the second one, I came in and like did a session with all of them and like did some team dynamics work and stuff like that. And so afterward, they were like, oh my gosh, things have already changed. Wow. One, they were cracking up the whole time when I was saying like, oh, this is how these people communicate. Cause they're like, oh yeah, that's you. They're a very close-knit team. So that worked really well. Yeah. But also like the boss was able to be like, oh, I need to like manage how I communicate with this person and give them a little bit more info and like offer them a little bit more insight. Yeah. And I think that can be really helpful too, because sometimes people don't anticipate, or they don't understand that their expectations of others, and this is especially true for 1s, 3s, and 8s in the workplace, have extremely high expectations of themselves and others. And I don't know what types you guys are, but every time
because I'm a 1. She's a 1.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm a 7.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So we have these high expectations, right? And then when people don't meet them, we're like, you're lazy, you're not working hard, blah, blah, blah. And just realizing like, oh, maybe they're doing it differently. Maybe slower is better in this case. Yeah. Maybe more thorough is better in this case. And so, I think that was just really, really impactful. And it was so great to get to hear that, because sometimes people, they do the session, they go on their merry way. Yeah. But I had another team that was like, the managers were like mostly all 8s. And so talking with them about like how to make themselves and their team more approachable was really, really helpful. Because it had been a real challenge. And so that's just like another quick example of how it can help. Even I mentioned that I was a manager and I did not know the Enneagram at that time. I was using this other tool that was helpful, but it was not as growth oriented.
Yeah.
And looking back, I'm like, my poor employee, because I was like, I definitely had this mindset of like, if you're not falling over dead at the end of the day, you haven't worked hard yet.
Oh yeah.
And that is so unhealthy, not only for me, like to have that perspective on myself, but to have that expectation of people that I was working with. Yeah. And so I would definitely approach that differently now.
Well, if you or someone listening is, they're not in an executive position, they're not in a position of, necessarily power where they could implement something like this, but they're super excited about it, passionate about it. They've been educating themselves on it. How would you recommend they go about introducing the concept as a potential tool for their specific organization?
Yeah, I think that, the first thing I would say is to get other people involved. The best way that I found is to say like, this is this tool. This is how it's impacting me. This is how I'm finding it useful. And kind of not saying, oh, you should check this out. But kind of just like talking about how impactful it's been for you. And that can be really, really helpful. And how it's like kind of that personal testimony aspect of it, that can be helpful. I would also say, I've heard this from organizations that I've worked with. So they've said, hey, can you come in and teach this? Where they've said, we've had a bunch of employees ask our HR team or our people services team to have a thing on the Enneagram. So you could also go that route. If you want to reach out to HR, just say like, hey, like I'm requesting this. Yeah. A lot of organizations do have employee development internally. So that, I think that's also a great way, is just to advocate for it.
Oh gosh, this is going to be so like niche, but Danny Meyer, he's like very well known in kind of the restaurant industry and the hospitality space, but he talks a lot about like this hierarchy of needs, basically, like a Maslow take. And there's this sort of idea that you have to take care of your people, your staff, your employees, if you want them to take care of your clients or your customers. And then those people will make sure that your stakeholders are taken care of. And it's sort of this kind of like domino effect. But internally, I think this is so valuable to do that work and to bring a team closer together and cultivate better communication, because that will absolutely be reflected in the work or the product or whatever it is that you do.
Absolutely. Because I think that the employee engagement aspect of it is super important, obviously. Yeah. And that's something that a lot of people I don't think would necessarily think about the Enneagram with employee engagement, but it's really helpful because I wrote a paper on this, about how, like, especially when people feel like they're really different from their coworkers, maybe gender or race or culture or religious background. If they feel like they're different, but they also feel like, their managers understand them and are very understanding and kind and empathetic toward them, and same with their coworkers, and they feel included and like they belong, that actually really mitigates a lot of the negative impacts of some of the other things that can be going on. And so that's, I think, a really important thing, because we don't want people to just continually turn over, right? Like we want people to stay in organizations because turnover is very expensive. And so, again, I think that getting people to a place where they're engaged and they feel like cared for as an employee, I think is extremely helpful, for keeping people around. And it's kind of like a selfish way of looking at the employee engagement, but I think for a lot of big organizations, that's what matters. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we discussed a little bit before how your Enneagram type is Enneagram 3. So maybe we could expand a little bit. What do you perceive are your most inherent strengths? And then we can touch on the challenges again a little bit.
So I would definitely say one of my top strengths is that I'm very resourceful. So I'll kind of have this vision for what I want to do or a dream I want to accomplish, and then I'll just figure it out. Like I mean, this is like in large ways and in small ways. Like if I go to the fridge and I don't have something planned for dinner, I just open it up and I make something, and it's good, because it's like that resourcefulness is really a great skill, I think, that is connected to my type. And I think also the ability to explain things in a simplified way that's not overly simplified. Like you don't have to be like an expert. You don't need like a grad school degree to understand my Enneagram content. But I think that I still try to keep a lot of the depth there. So I think those are some strengths. I also think that in general, a lot of our weaknesses are our strengths in overdrive, right? So my strength is this ability to like see a dream and accomplish it. My biggest challenges are basically that I have incredibly high expectations for myself. And that can be really hard because a lot of the time, a lot of the growth work that you see for 3s is like, you just need to work less. But the challenge with that is if you just work less and you still have the same expectations, you haven't questioned the expectations, you just feel like a failure.
Yeah.
And so for me, I think the challenge is finding ways to question my expectations of myself and bring in a lot more self-compassion and self-acceptance, so that I can kind of work through them instead of just, overworking myself, which is pretty tiring.
Yeah. Do you find that 3s experience imposter syndrome more so than other types?
I'm not sure. I think yes and no. I also, and maybe this is totally a 3 thing, but I don't necessarily think imposter syndrome is a bad thing.
No, I don't think so either.
Yeah. So I think for imposter syndrome, so I'll just like give an example. It's really embarrassing, but whatever. So,
we love authenticity here.
So let's see, 2013, I think I was planning my wedding and I hated flowers. I was like, the only time I've ever seen flowers that look nice is when they're dried. But then I started doing research, and I started seeing these like really beautiful and like wild and diverse arrangements. And that was really different. And so I was like, oh, I love this. And so I started doing a lot of research, started getting into it. For a while, I was going to do my own flowers for my wedding. And fortunately, some very wise people in my life were like, don't do that. Like, you're going to go crazy.
Yeah.
So, but like I had a roommate who asked me to do her flowers for her wedding, and I did it once. And then I was like, okay, this is my business now. And so I started like booking weddings. Like I started like being booked for big weddings, and like I learned as I went along. Right. So, and for whatever reason, I didn't have a lot of imposter syndrome in that moment, even though I should have. And so I think in those moments, sometimes imposter syndrome can be helpful because it's like, okay, maybe this is actually an area like a gap in your knowledge that you need to lean into and learn. Yeah. So whenever I encounter imposter syndrome, I'm like, okay, what is it trying to tell me? Like, do I need to listen to this voice or no? Yeah. Like, am I okay? But I do think that in general, that story aside, I think that 3s sometimes feel like they know even if they don't really know the Enneagram, there's a sense of knowing that what they're projecting outwardly is not necessarily exactly the same as what's inside.
Okay.
And so I think that can cause imposter syndrome sometimes too.
Well, in addition to your own published work and of course, 9 Types Go, I'm going to keep saying it, you guys, 9 Types. What resources do you recommend for those pretty much at any point in their Enneagram journey, whether this is the first time they're hearing about it and they're like, what are they talking about? Or they kind of feel like they're pretty well steeped in all that's out there, whether it's, books, podcasts, your podcast, feel free, social media platforms, whatever it is.
Yeah. So one book that I really like that's perfect for people who are just starting out is called The Essential Enneagram. And it's written by Dr. David Daniels and Virginia Price. And it is really extremely simple. It has a little quick test in it. It's very short, but it is really enlightening. And Dr. David Daniels, his website is also really great. It's very, he goes into the neurobiology of the Enneagram, which is really fascinating to me.
Okay.
Yeah. He was a psychiatrist. And so that's kind of his take on it. So I love that. I really like the Enneagram 2.0 podcast, as well as the Art of Growth. So Art of Growth, they tend to have a lot of interviews and panels. Enneagram 2.0 is for people who they're done with the basics. They've got all that down and they want more. And then I also, something just came to my mind and I've forgotten now. What I was going to mention earlier is a couple of friends of mine made a book called Enneaflip. And basically it is, a tool, and it's really great for the workplace, but it's a communication tool. You can flip to your type on one side and the other type on the other side.
Oh, that's cool.
That's really smart. Wow.
Yeah, it is. It's so genius. So, that's a really great resource as well for people, especially who want to bring it into the workplace. Mm-hmm. It's a physical book.
Yeah.
So those are some of my favorites. I also really like The Complete Enneagram by Beatrice Chestnut. If people are wanting to go deeper, it reads like a textbook sometimes, but I think it's very enlightening. So really helpful.
Yeah. And that just lends credibility and depth, I think, in equal measure. When you have something that reads like a textbook, it right. a sense of authority to the topic.
Totally.
Amazing. We will link everything she just said in the show notes.
Yes.
If you are interested too. And some of those things I hadn't heard of. So I'm excited, especially
we've got some new material
for the Dr. David Daniel website. That is fascinating.
The way that we like to wrap up the episodes are with some rapid fire questions. So we have 2 sections. We have some Enneagram specific rapid fires, and then the rapid fires we ask all of our ReDIScover guests. So we'll start with the Enneagram rapid fires.
Wait, can I explain why, or do I just have to say the type?
If you can explain why, that would be awesome.
Okay, great. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I don't want people to get mad at me.
No, I'd love to hear why, because I'm fascinated.
Yeah, I think especially for the Enneagram ones. Yeah, probably explain why.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that'd be great. Okay. So for Enneagram rapid fires, first one, which type would be your ideal travel buddy?
Okay. I think either 7 or 8. 7, because obviously they're just really fun. And I am, as a 3, I think this is part of being a 3. I really gravitate toward other people's energy. So, and I love to travel in the sense of going out and just exploring everything possible. And so I think that taps into that 7 energy as well. And also I really love how 7s can be really strategic in planning things. We're going to go here and we're going to do this. And then we're going to do this. And then we're going to do this. And that's totally how my brain works too. And so I get excited about it. And also 8s, because I just love 8s and they're really authentic. They have really a great gut instinct about other people and about situations. So they're really trustworthy in that sense. And yeah, I think that would be really fun to just get out and go and experience everything. Plus, I would never feel like I'm dragging them along. If I travel with somebody who only wants to do one thing a day, I'm let's go do something else. So
yeah. Well, as someone who's traveled with this 7 right here, She's a great travel buddy, and she is very strategic with the planning.
I love it.
But I'm a 1, so I love the structure.
Love it.
It's great. Which Enneagram type would you want to be with you in an emergency situation?
I said type 6, and that probably won't surprise a lot of people. But 6s are just really calm in emergencies because they've thought through it. They already know what's going to happen. And I had a really high pressure job in which there were times when we definitely had some emergencies. And so my boss was a 6 though, and she everything was in binders, and she just followed the process and followed the protocol, and that created great structure for her. And so I always knew I could rely on her because she wasn't going to panic. She wasn't going to catastrophize or be like, oh no, what are we going to do? Which sometimes I felt like that. I was like, what do we do next? And would kind of do something spontaneous, but she was so reliable, and I really appreciated that.
Yeah. Cool. That's awesome.
Okay. Which Enneagram type would you want to have a heart-to-heart with?
This one's so hard. I feel like every type almost, because every type is just, I have friends of all the types in there. And I think sometimes the types that people don't really think of to have a heart with like type 5, but you can really get to know someone better, especially in that one-on-one setting. But I said type 1 because my husband's a 1. And so I just like talking to him.
That's cute. Totally acceptable answer. I have a lot of 5s weirdly in my life. I feel like it's not super common, but I love how deep they go. They're not afraid to go all the way to the bottom of the ocean. Which Enneagram type would you want to be your boss, which maybe you've already answered? And then in that same vein, which type do you think from your point of view makes the best coworker?
My boss, I think I really like 8s again. And also other 3s. I think I get along really well with other 3s. The big thing for me, and this is actually probably something I could work on, but, it can be a real challenge to not take over if somebody isn't, really showing their leadership capacities, right? If they don't seem very sure, or if they tend to beat around the bush, they tend to not be very upfront with feedback. Those things drive me nuts. So I'm like, let's just get to the point. And so I think I really work well with 3s and 8s, just in general. And then coworkers, I don't know. I've loved all of my coworkers of different types. Some of my favorite coworkers have been 6s. I really like, this can be any type, but I really like people who are willing to just put their head down and do their work. But also when they're not working are wanting to connect, right? Wanting to have an actual relationship. I really appreciate people who say hi in the morning, good morning or hello when they get there. Super awkward when you're in an open office and nobody talks to anyone. So yeah, maybe again, 2s, 3s, really any type I think could make a good coworker.
Which type would you want to be stranded with on a deserted island?
If I wanted to get off the island, probably a 6. But if I just wanted to if there's no possibility of getting off the island, or if, probably a 9, just to be it's fine. Or a 4. I think 4s are really great with that too, where it's just this is what it is, and finding the beauty in everything. So, yeah.
I love it. I love that every type was just represented in that whole rapid fire series. We got something for everyone. Yeah. So we like to ask every single guest we have on our podcast a few questions that really align with kind of what our ethos of this whole journey has been and what it's evolving into. And the first of that is, what does living authentically mean to you?
Being present fully to myself and my emotions and the people in my life.
If you could travel to one place anywhere in the world right now, where would it be and why?
I think somewhere tropical, just to I don't know, sip Mai Tais and just chill and
sounds ideal.
Just to be away. Yeah.
Yeah. The dream right now.
Honestly, sounds so ideal. What is one thing you would be doing every day if your life were free of all limitations?
Learning. I really like that. I just finished grad school, and then I'm like, I'm not supposed to be, but I'm like really interested in going back again for a PhD. Right. And then, recently though, I'm in a second Enneagram certification program. And so recently I took a 5-day course within that program. And I was like, if I could just get paid to sit here and learn all day, every day, I would just love it.
Our final question. We often talk about what it's like to be childlike versus childish. So what is one childlike quality that you think would be beneficial if adults utilized it in their daily lives?
I think wonder is one, like just kind of the ability to be in awe of life and people and things. Cause I think kids like have like an expectant type of awe, like where it's like, oh, wow. And then like they think of the beach and then they're like, oh, I can go to the beach, even if they live nowhere near the beach. It's just like, that's that sense of wonder. And also one that I would like to cultivate. So skill that I would like to develop, is play. Like, I think that we are missing a lot of that. And it's very difficult to actually engage in like play and silliness. And so I think that would be great for all adults to like be a little less serious, a little more playful.
Yeah. And a little less glued to the agendas and the routines of the day and just do a thing just to do the thing. Well, thank you. This topic has excited me more than most things I have uncovered in my adult life. And I just can't wait to keep learning more. I hope that this has excited all of you too. I hope that if you were here for kind of the first piece of this Enneagram series, that this has just lit another fire under you and you're excited to learn more. Please go follow Steph over at 9 Types Go on Instagram. She also has a podcast. She has a book, The Enneagram in Love, and you have your website, right? It's by the same name, 9 Types Go. So you can find over there as well.
Thank you so much, Steph. We're so grateful for you spending time with us. We hope you had fun too.
Yeah.
We hope that you guys all learned a little bit something new about the Enneagram and we were able to expand on even more.
Thank you all so much for listening. And next week, we will be back at 8 a.m. Eastern time on Tuesday morning with a new conversation. Bye.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of ReDIScover.
Please subscribe and leave us a review wherever you're listening. Your reviews are what keep us going, and we'd love to hear from you.
Join us every Tuesday for a new conversation and let us know what you think we should talk about next.
Follow us on Instagram at positively.kristen and at jessicafay508. And check out Jess's blog at theroadjesstraveled with 1l.com.
Until next time,
stay frumpy.